Goes.
Yeah,
Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So
mm,
Morris had a question which I feel should be for the record, and he's agreed to ask his question, and I'll do the best I can to answer it.
so the various commentaries, especially Rashi, pulls together uh, comments about similar material from, say, the Megillah Esther or other writings or comments by the prophets. And I just wonder about how do you reconcile the fact that they're obviously all been done by different writers. So how can you assess them as one coherent statement?
So I think there's part of the idea is that they all share in a similar, if not the same, belief. And I think, in fact, it's an excuse to me to share with you an insight that I may have shared before, but I think it's one that helps me a lot these days. And that is the meaning of that first line of Shema Yisrael. They all would be saying that. They'd all be sharing that particular statement. And I struggled for years and years to try and get a deeper meaning as to what it was saying. And after reading some commentaries, etc., and maybe allowing some of those comments to sink in, this is where I'm at now. The Yisrael of Shema Yisrael is Jacob, our great ancestor. This is not my own idea. I wish I could say it was, but it isn't. It's something I read. It said that Yisrael is Yisrael Saba, Yisrael grandpa, meaning, of course, Jacob. So that when we say Shema Yisrael, we are addressing Jacob. And we're saying, listen, Jacob, Adonai. And that term Adonai, I think, is commonly understood if you read through the Torah and all the entire Bible. We're talking about a transcendent creator, one transcendent creator in which the entire universe is enclosed, right? So God is a necessary cause, and beyond the universe itself is, in fact, just one element of all the reality that God encompasses. And that's why you have Yud Hey Vav Hey, right? You know that the letters Yud Hey Vav Hey make up past, present, future. In other words, transcending time as well. The Eloheinu is the essential element of this here, and the reason why it's it's in the you know it's our God. Adonai is Adonai, but whether God is our Elohim, that's another story. And we're saying to Jacob that just as God was his Elohim, God is also our Elohim. And the idea of a God as your Elohim means that you accept God as your judge, as your ruler, as your commander. So this has, of course, all to do with keeping mitzvot, with keeping commandments. Because if you simply have Adonai, you don't necessarily have commandments. But when you have God as your Elohim, that means you understand that this vast, ineffable, transcendent being, right, has a relationship to you, and that you can create that close relationship with God. And when you say Adonai Echad, it means it is the same Adonai, that in doing this, it's the same Adonai as Jacob's Adonai. That we all have an understanding and a commitment and a belief to this concept. And this is what unites everything. You know also that there are many discussions and disagreements within Jewish tradition. There are disagreements amongst the commentators. If you read Rashi, you can read Ibn Ezra. There are times when Ibn Ezra disagrees with Rashi. But part of that ineffability of God is the idea that you can have what appear to be opposing ideas, not opposing beliefs, but opposing ideas that nevertheless can be within the system. And essentially, the way these things become harmonized has to do with circumstances. And so, very often in the Talmud, they will bring up the whole issue of this seems to contradict that. And what they will do is they'll show that given a certain circumstance, this particular argument or this particular law applies. And in this circumstance, a different law applies. There's also a statement that says that one measure of understanding, of knowledge and wisdom, etc., and scholarship is when you can argue both sides of the case compellingly. And the understanding I have of that means you have such a deep understanding, that understanding meaning not only with your head, but with your heart as well, of a side, that you can argue it compellingly, and that you yourself understand that beyond Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, there are different approaches, but there is a consistency in everything that's from Bereshit to the very last sentence in the Book of Chronicles.
Hmm.
Okay? And that's what keeps it all together, and that's what makes it dynamic. It's what it makes alive. So that when I understand now that when I say Shema Israel, I'm addressing my great ancestor Jacob, and I'm saying what you learned from your father and what he learned from Abraham is what I hope I'm also, you know, reflecting in the life that I'm living. It also gives far more significance to what I'm, the sort of meager approach that I contribute, right? This tiny little flame that I might represent to the whole enterprise. So there are these statements that we know, like the Shema, which in the course of my life I've tried to get a better understanding of, and I've just shared with you an understanding. I'm not saying it's the only understanding, but I am saying to you that after thinking of various different ways to interpret this, for me at least at this point in my life, it's most satisfying. I'm not saying the best, I'm just saying the most satisfying. And I think it's closest to the truth, if that's possible to say that. Having said that, there's another statement that I have long and wondered about and tried to gain a better understanding of. And that is this marvelous statement that's right there in the first chapter of Genesis about man being created in the divine image. What exactly does that mean? So on some levels, I've understood it to mean that it's a moral imperative, meaning that if I wrong you, if I harm another human being, essentially, I'm desecrating God. That I need to respect and
Uh,
care for other people, other human beings,
right.
no matter what their color is, no matter what their belief is, no matter what, but to treat them with respect. Okay, so that held me for a long, long time. I don't, at this point, I've gone a step further. There's something more. I mean, to say God's image, that's a pretty profound statement, okay? And so I think it's saying something else as well, which is very consistent with my new understanding, my relatively new understanding of the Shema, which is that saying that you as a human being are created in a divine image means that you yourself, in the life that you live, can be a force in which the divine comes into the world. That when you perform mitzvot, when you treat people with compassion and kindness, right, you can be this corridor, you might say, right, from the divine into this world. That's what it means. At least that's a level of understanding that I have. And what I love about it, of course, because it feeds my liberal tendencies, is that it isn't limited just to Jews. It applies to any human being. So that's consistent with the idea of Shema Israel. I've found other statements that seem to support this kind of understanding. There's a statement that Rabbi Yehuda, that Hanasi, the one who compiled the Mishnah, used to feel that just simply saying Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, and understanding what that meant encapsulated all the ideas that are in the several paragraphs of the Shema. That when he said that, he felt he had fulfilled his obligation. And again, my understanding of religion in general is it's trying to help us find a way to act with significance, to make our lives, to see the value of our lives, and that acting in a way that is significant, right, that makes our own presence significant in this way in which the divine is brought down into this world. Um, is perhaps the greatest thing we can achieve as human beings. I hope this is answering your question because what I'm saying to you, Morris, is that whether you read the prophets, whether you read the writings, whether you read the Torah, they all basically are giving this message, right? Um, you're not going to see in Exodus, you shall not commit adultery, and then somewhere else where it says, hey, it's quite okay. Do it. It's not going to do that. But please, I've spoken a lot, and I think you're entitled to a follow-up question.
No, no, I'm getting the gist of it. I mean, it's not that simple. Going from Shema to the all the various interpretations being
Hmm.
uh, basically the same statement that God is one. But that's the message there.
Right. What does it exactly mean to believe in one divine, transcendent creator? What exactly does that mean? Right? And that's part of being alive, right? Is taking your life and thinking about these things and trying to grow in your understanding.
To me, there's a lot of similarity to Hinduism.
May well be.
It, it's the same that uh, you're just everything. You are part of everything.
Yes. Well,
Everything is part of you. So
but you can fight it. By the way, the word I was really trying to look for was the word conduit, right? That we are, in a sense, have the ability to be conduits of bringing the divine into this world. And by the way, this is also consistent with the prayers in the prayer book. That as I've, become familiar and learned more about them and seen, a sort of consistent theme. One, the theme of the Aleinu, which is the idea that on the one hand we understand this divine, transcendent creator, etc., and the deep wish for humanity to recognize and to behave in a way that is consistent with that belief. That's basically what the Aleinu is saying, and it's a yearning. It's a yearning, and maybe that's part of our purpose. Is to yearn for times such as this. They seem very far off at times, but thank God we've got it. Thank God we have this material to be able to, you know, try and direct our own lives, which are, our own mortal lives, and recognize, that we're here for such a brief period, and yet we're capable of accomplishing so much. So, any,
thank you.
of course, I hope it answered the question, at least to some satisfactory extent.
Yeah,
You know, okay. I obviously used it as a springboard, so thank you for that opportunity.
that's good.
All righty. Okay, let's take a look at the text now. We have a little time left, so we'll take a look. And here we are. Okay, so here, we're actually right here. We're on to chapter 50. Chapter 50. We're getting awfully close to the end of Bereshit, of the book of Genesis. Vayipol Yosef al pnei aviv. Right, so Joseph fell. I'll say al pnei aviv would be like in the sight of his father, right? In the presence, how about that? In the presence of his father. Vayevk alav, he cried upon him, okay? Vayishaklo, and he kissed him. So you understand that this is describing a very intimate moment where you have this beautiful love that father and son have for one another because he realizes that the end is coming, that his dad is about to expire. Okay, so Vayitzav Yosef et avadav ve'et harofim, and Joseph commanded his servants, and the literally a rofer it's the modern word for doctor, but someone who obviously is practiced in various forms of medicine, in other words, of the art of working with human beings and being able to understand and manipulate various elements of their bodies, etc. Lachanot et aviv, and you'll see this Rashi here because lachanot is an unusual word, so Rashi has to jump in and help us. So I'll let Rashi do the translating for us. We'll just say to lachanot his father, vayachantu harofim, and the rofim. We'll translate it as doctors, but it's more than that, okay? And they did this. This is the verb, et Israel, Israel. So let's take a look. Lachanot et aviv. Inyan merkachat besamimhu. He says that it has to do with the application of various spices. In other words, we're talking essentially, right, about the work of using various spices, it's what they would be called, like medicines, we'd say, right, to help with the body. And what it has to do, of course, is embalming. That's what they did. Even though nowadays we don't embalm, but the consistency is that Jacob had asked Joseph to promise him. The beginning of this parsha dealt with Jacob extracting an oath from Joseph that he would not bury him in Egypt. So they were going to have to transport the body back to the cave of Machpela in the land of Canaan in order to actually bury Jacob. So it clearly might well, beg further discussion because, as I said, our practice nowadays is to allow the body to decompose naturally. We don't believe in cremation. That is traditional Jewish belief is against cremation. God doesn't need our help in this process, but to allow the natural process to take place of the decomposition of the body. But it's possible that these were some of the reasons why in this place we had the embalming going on. Vayimal'u arba'im yom, and so 40 days passed by. So Jacob has expired, and 40 days took place. Kikein yimulu'u yimei chanutim. So that was the amount of time it took to embalm the body, 40 days. Vayivku oto Mitzrayim, and Egypt, in other words, not just his family, but the entire uh, country, can we call it that? No, but Egypt, all of Egypt, cried, right? They mourned for him 70 days, Shiv'im Yom, 70 days. So, Vayim le'ulo, so they were filled. Hishlimulo, Yemei Chanitato, right? So, in other words, they had to let this process of embalming take place. Ad shemal'ulo arba'im yom, until 40 days had elapsed. Vayivku oto, and they mourned for him. They cried literally for him. Arba'im, 40 lechanita, 40 for the embalming. Ushloshim lebechiya, and 30 days for mourning. So there we get the shloshim there, right? The fee, right? Because Sheba'alahem bracha leraglo, because they recognized that when he arrived, that is when Jacob arrived in Egypt, they achieved or they received a blessing. They experienced a blessing. What was this blessing that Jacob brought to Egypt? Shekala harav, the famine ended. The famine was supposed to last for 7 years, but Jacob actually arrived, I believe it was 2 years into the famine, and it ended. And they recognized that Jacob's righteousness had that effect of bringing the famine to an end. V'hayu me Nilus, and the waters of the Nile, mitbarchim. They, I believe, so here's this word bracha, and I said that the essential meaning of the word bracha has to do with plenitude. So there was the flooding of the Nile took place in in a beautiful kind of way. And there was all the water they needed. So I was thinking about this. And, because here, after looking at Jacob's life, we've been told many details regarding the life of Jacob. You wouldn't have jumped to say that he was a tzaddik. He certainly didn't seem to be as much of a tzaddik when he was younger. But he goes through all this torment in life. He experiences great tragedy. The one love of his life, Rachel, is barren. He, as I like to say, had Laban not tricked him, he would have had one wife. That would have been Rachel. Had Rachel not been barren, he probably wouldn't have had Bilhah to build his family from her. He would have had all his children through Rachel. And then when Rachel gives him a second child, she dies in childbirth. So on that particular level, he experiences great adversity. He also has to escape his brother because he's worried that his brother's going to kill him. He experiences a very interesting and deep process when he has to meet up with Esau on his way back after 20 years. And then, of course, we have Joseph, that Joseph was gone from him for such a long period of time. So look at what he had to go through. And at this particular point, he has become a tzaddik. He has gone through the fires of torment, and he's become purified as a human being. And there's a great message here. And beyond this, I felt it is saying that when you choose to act in a righteous way, when you don't listen to the voices of appetite and temptation and all those other voices that like to say, doing this isn't such a terrible thing, and doing that isn't such a terrible thing, and giving in to those sorts of things, that really trying to live a righteous life has an effect on the community well beyond your own personal life. And imagine the effect on a society where people are devoted to acting in a righteous kind of way. And that's the message I get from this little piece that we're reading right now. So let's go on. Make sure I want to start at the beginning of the sentence. There we go. And I think we got to the end of that Rashi. I want to make sure. Yes, very good. Sorry. Here we go. I went back too far. Vaya'avru yemei bechito, and the days of his mourning passed. Vaydaber Yosef el Beit Paro lemor, and Joseph spoke to Pharaoh's court, saying, Imna matzati chen be'enechem, if I have found favor in your eyes. In other words, if you approve. Dabru na be'oznei Paro lemor. Please speak in Pharaoh's hearing to say. And I'm going to stop here for today. So, God willing, we will continue this the next time we get together.
Meeting on Wednesday.
I would we not be meeting tomorrow?
Oh, meeting tomorrow. Okay. Okay.
I think so. I'm
Sure.
hoping
Yeah.
so.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Let me stop the share. All right. Any reflections, comments, thoughts?
Uh, Still processing.
Okay. Well, enjoy.
Yes.
David, welcome. It's good to see you back. So, all right, I'm going to
Thanks.
stop the recording. I just want to let people say if they want to say anything for the record. That's all. All right.